inspired by real-life events. Narrator Aman grew up in a forgotten corner of northern Bangladesh, where mornings began before the sun fully understood the sky, where fog wrapped the fields like unfinished thoughts, and where people learned early that life does not wait for anyone to feel ready. And from childhood, he observed a pattern that repeated itself in every home around him. Fathers leaving before sunrise, mothers calculating every meal like a careful equation, children growing up faster than their age because time in that place did not move gently, it pushed, and Aman was no exception. Because even as a child, he carried a strange awareness that nothing around him was permanent except struggle itself. And his father worked as a small van driver in the local town, earning just enough to keep the household moving forward day by day. While his mother stitched clothes for neighbors, her fingers always busy even when her mind was tired. And Aman learned to read silence more than words, noticing how adults never said, "We are struggling," but showed it in delayed meals, in tired eyes, in conversations that stopped abruptly when children entered the room. And he grew up quiet, not because he had nothing to say, but because he learned early that listening was safer than speaking. And in school, he was neither outstanding nor forgotten, just a student who sat near the middle, always observing the world beyond the blackboard, thinking about what kind of life existed outside of the boundaries of his village. And that curiosity slowly turned into ambition, though he never called it that at first, because in his environment, ambition sounded like something dangerous, something that could disappoint you if you touched it too strongly. And after finishing his studies, he reached a moment where life stopped feeling like routine and started feeling like a decision waiting to happen. Because two opportunities arrived at the same time. One was a stable job in a nearby town office with fixed income, predictable future, and social acceptance that came with safety. While the other was an uncertain invitation from a startup in the city that offered no guarantee, no structure, only chaos wrapped in possibility. And for days, Aman did not tell anyone fully what he was thinking, because every conversation he heard pushed him towards safety. Every elder advised him to choose stability, and every logical explanation supported the idea of a predictable life. But inside him, there was a discomfort that did not fade, like a question that kept repeating itself even in silence. And one evening, he sat with his father near the small roadside tea stall, watching vehicles pass by, carrying people toward unknown destinations. And after a long silence, he asked, "Baba, what if I choose something uncertain and lose everything?" And his father did not respond immediately, because he understood the weight behind that question. And after a moment, he said quietly, "Losing is part of life, but never choosing is like living without direction at all." And that sentence stayed inside Aman longer than anything else he had ever heard. And days turned into nights of thinking, and nights turned into internal battles, where fear and hope kept replacing each other, until finally he made his decision to join the startup, stepping into a city life that felt faster, louder, and more unpredictable than anything he had experienced before. And the office he entered was small, slightly disorganized, filled with young people trying to create something out of incomplete ideas, and nothing felt stable. Not schedules, not plans, not even confidence. And in the beginning, Aman tried to adapt quickly, working long hours, learning new systems, trying to prove himself through effort alone. But soon, he discovered that effort without clarity often leads to exhaustion. And there were nights when he returned to his rented room completely drained, sitting in silence while the ceiling fan above him moved endlessly, as if mocking his stillness. And during those moments, he would think about home, about his mother's hands that never stopped working, about his father's tired face that never complained, and a strange mixture of guilt and determination would rise inside him. Because every step forward in his new life felt like a distance from his old one. And in the startup, he met people like Farhan, Imran, Sohel, Imtiaz, Sohela, Rafi, and Adil, each carrying their own invisible battles, each trying to turn uncertainty into something meaningful. And together they formed a fragile group, held together not by stability, but by shared confusion and silent hope. And often they would sit late at night surrounded by whiteboards filled with incomplete ideas, half-written plans, and cold cups of tea. And Imran once said with a tired half-smile, "If this works, people will call us lucky, and if it fails, no one will even remember we tried." And they all laughed softly. But the silence after that laugh was heavier than the joke itself. And as months passed, the startup entered a difficult phase where funding delays started affecting salaries, clients became unreliable, and pressure slowly turned into a constant background noise in everyone's life. And Aman found himself becoming quieter, more observant, speaking less but thinking more. Because he realized that in unstable environments, reacting quickly often creates more problems than observing carefully. And during this time, his family back home also began facing quiet difficulties, especially his father, whose health slowly weakened after years of continuous work, though he never expressed it openly. And Aman would call home regularly, trying to sound normal, hearing reassurances that everything was fine, not realizing that those reassurances were often given to protect his focus rather than reflect reality. Until one night, everything changed when his phone rang unexpectedly late, and his mother's voice came through broken and unstable, saying, "Your father collapsed today." And in that instant, everything inside Aman stopped, because suddenly deadlines, meetings, and ambitions felt meaningless compared to the fear of losing someone who had always been his foundation. And he rushed back home immediately, traveling through a journey that felt longer than physical distance. And when he reached the hospital and saw his father lying weak, connected to machines, breathing slowly and irregularly, Aman felt a silence inside him that had no words, because the man he had always seen as unbreakable now looked fragile in a way he was not prepared to understand. And he sat beside him, holding his hand, feeling the weight of years, sacrifices, and quiet love inside that single touch. And his father slowly opened his eyes and said with effort, "Don't stop your life for me. Just make sure it has meaning." And those words entered Aman like something permanent. And after days of uncertainty, his father's condition stabilized but never fully returned to normal. And Aman went back to the city carrying a different version of himself, one that no longer saw success as ambition alone, but as responsibility. And the startup soon reached one of its most critical phases, where everything felt like it might collapse at any moment. And one rainy night, when the office was nearly empty and silence filled every corner, Aman sat with Farhan and Imran, listening to the sound of rain hitting the glass he used like a slow reminder of uncertainty. And Farhan said quietly, "Maybe this is where most people stop." And Imran replied after a pause, "Or maybe this is where people finally understand what they are made of." And Arman stayed silent for a long time, feeling every memory of his journey collide inside him. The struggle, the fear, the responsibility, the distance from home. And then he finally said slowly, "If we stop now, everything we went through becomes only pain. But if we continue, even pain becomes part of something meaningful. And that night, they did not quit. Instead, they rebuilt everything from the ground up, rethinking strategies, correcting mistakes, working longer hours, learning from failures instead of avoiding them. And slowly, step by step, things began to shift, not suddenly, but gradually, like light returning after a long night. And years passed with continuous effort. And Armin changed deeply through that journey, becoming more patient, more grounded, more aware that life is not defined by speed but by endurance. And one evening after a long day, he stood on the rooftop with Farhan and Imran, watching the city lights stretch endlessly into the horizon. And Imran said quietly, "We almost gave up so many times." And Armin replied with calm understanding, "Yes, but every time we continued, we became stronger than we were before." And in that moment, he understood something final, that life is not about avoiding uncertainty, but about learning how to move through it without losing yourself. And every hardship is a silent teacher that only reveals its lesson after endurance. And every choice creates a version of yourself that only time can introduce you to. And as the wind moved through the city, he realized that true strength is not never falling, but continuing after every fall. And the real meaning of life is not found in comfort, but in the ability to turn struggle into direction. Because in the end, a person is not measured by how easy their path was, but by how deeply they continued when everything around them told them to stop. And that truth stayed with Armin like a quiet, permanent light that never faded, reminding him that every ending people fear is often just the beginning of finally becoming who they were always meant to be.